The Astra 9 station hung like a jewel in the cold expanse of space, its sleek silver frame illuminated by the distant glow of nearby stars. Inside, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. The United Human Confederation had worked tirelessly to gain a foothold in galactic politics, and this summit was their chance to prove they could coexist with the more established empires of the galaxy. Ambassador Jessica Cole paced nervously in her quarters, a small, simple room furnished with a single desk and a large viewport overlooking the dark void. She wasn't worried about the summit itself. Her diplomatic skills had been honed over years of tense negotiations, but about the weight of what was at stake. If this meeting failed, it wouldn't just set back human interests. It could spark an interstellar war. The Galactic Empire, with its immense power and centuries-old rule, could easily crush any attempts at resistance. Jessica knew this, but she also knew that humanity had something the Empire lacked: the will to fight for what was right. With a deep breath, Jessica turned away from the window. Her personal assistant, a holographic AI named Alicia, had been briefing her all morning on the details of the final agreements. The humans and the Empire had been at a standstill for years, their relationship strained by suspicion and past skirmishes. Today, they were meant to decide the future of humanity's role in the galaxy: peaceful coexistence or open hostility. She checked her reflection in the mirror, straightened her collar, and left the room, making her way to the conference hall. The space was large and opulent, designed to impress, with walls of polished marble and ceilings that soared above like the interior of a grand cathedral. At the center of the room, a long oval table sat under the harsh glow of bright overhead lights. The Empire's delegation was already seated, their representatives draped in silken robes, their alien faces unreadable. At the head of the table sat Supreme Commander Caldrex, a towering figure of pale blue skin and spiny ridges, whose cold, calculating gaze seemed to pierce through Jessica as she approached. His eyes flicked briefly to the human delegation, his expression barely changing, but there was a palpable tension in the air, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Ambassador Cole." Caldrex's voice boomed, low and authoritative. "I trust you've had a pleasant journey." "Pleasant enough, Commander," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the nervous knot in her stomach. "Shall we begin?" Before Caldrex could respond, an aide signaled that everything was ready. Jessica took her seat, her team positioned around the table. The Empire's representatives watched in silence, their eyes narrowing as the meeting formally commenced. The discussion started civilly enough: trade agreements, border disputes, and the occasional diplomatic jab. But beneath the surface, there was an unmistakable tension. The Empire was wary of humanity's rapid expansion, its colonies spreading further into contested space. Caldrex, in particular, seemed determined to maintain the Empire's dominance, though he carefully masked his true feelings behind a mask of diplomatic politeness. It was when Jessica presented the proposal for mutual military defense, offering humanity's cooperation in exchange for peace, that the true animosity began to surface. Caldrex's demeanor shifted subtly, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Mutual defense," he repeated slowly. "Interesting. But how can we trust your people to keep their word when you've proven so unpredictable?" His tone was sharp, cutting through the air with an icy edge. Jessica's heart raced. She knew that statement wasn't about policy. It was about fear. The Empire feared humanity's rise, feared the unpredictable, tenacious spark they had shown. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Caldrex's, and spoke with a calm that belied the turmoil inside. "I can assure you, Commander, the only thing humanity fears is being silenced. We seek peace, not domination. But if you force us to fight, you'll find we have the strength to defend ourselves." Her words hung in the air, tense and heavy. For a moment, there was silence. The weight of her declaration settled over the room, and Caldrex's eyes flicked briefly to his subordinates before he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We shall see, Ambassador," he said softly. "We shall see." And then, Just as the meeting seemed to settle into a tentative peace, the unthinkable happened. A sharp crack echoed through the room, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. The lights flickered, and a metallic clanging noise reverberated across the chamber. A flash of red filled Jessica's vision as a bright, searing light burst from the far end of the table. A blinding explosion erupted, and everything went black. When Jessica Cole opened her eyes, she was no longer in the conference hall. The world around her spun with disorienting speed. Her ears rang with a high-pitched hum, and her body felt heavy, as though every muscle was made of lead. For a moment, she could hardly remember what had happened. Her mind struggled to piece together the events that had led to this moment. The explosion, the blinding light, the screams. Then it came crashing back in a rush. The conference room, the shattering explosion, the blinding flash, the sudden, sharp pain in her chest. Her chest. She gasped in panic and tried to move, but her arms refused to cooperate. They felt numb, as if they were no longer part of her. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her throat burned, dry and tight. She tried to sit up, but the effort only sent waves of dizziness crashing through her head. Ambassador Cole, Jessica. A familiar voice, a man's voice, sliced through the haze of confusion. She tried to focus on the sound, but the words barely registered before her vision went dark again. When she woke for the second time, there was no ringing, no dizziness, only a quiet, steady hum. The soft click of machinery in the background. Her mind cleared, and the memories of the blast surged forward again, sharper this time. She tried to move, but was restrained by thick, cold metal cuffs. A chill ran down her spine. Where am I? Her voice was hoarse, cracked. On the Vanguard, came the response. The voice was unmistakable. Colonel Jason Holt, a sharp, no-nonsense leader who had been a part of the UHC's military council for years. If anyone could be trusted to get her out of this alive, it was him. The Vanguard. You? She tried to sit up but was immediately met with sharp pain in her side. What happened? Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. You were hit in the blast, Ambassador, Holt said, his voice grim. Shrapnel. We pulled you out of there just in time, but you were unconscious when we got you on board. Jessica closed her eyes, trying to make sense of it all. The explosion, the meeting, the assassination. She could almost hear it now. The shock of her own voice calling for a ceasefire, the disbelief as Calderex stared at her, and then the scream of a blaster firing, too fast to react. But she couldn't remember who had fired. Holt's voice broke into her thoughts. The summit's gone to hell, Jessica. The Empire's denying everything, but the whole station's in flames. No survivors from your delegation. They'll say it was a rogue faction, but we both know it wasn't. Jessica's chest tightened as the implications hit her all at once. The Empire had struck first, cutting down one of the UHC's most prominent leaders. There was no denying the escalation, no denying that this was no random attack, but a declaration of war. Her heart raced. We need to respond. Fast, before they use this as an excuse to destroy us. Jason nodded sharply. Already moving. But this won't be easy. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and the Empire isn't going to take kindly to the first human fleet striking back. His tone softened just slightly. You're lucky to be alive. Luck's got nothing to do with it, Jessica whispered, her mind already turning. We need to show them what humanity can do. Make sure the galaxy knows we won't be bullied anymore. She pushed herself up, her vision still blurry but her determination solidifying. We can't waste time. What's our first move? Holt's eyes darkened as he looked at her. We take the fight to them, but we'll need every ally we can find. And a hell of a lot of luck. Jessica stared at him, the weight of her decision sinking in. The war had already begun. Now, they had no choice but to finish it. The Vanguard slipped through the quiet shadows of space, its hull barely visible against the endless black. The sleek, experimental human warship was a symbol of what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. It was small, nimble, and equipped with technology that the Empire hadn't yet anticipated: stealth cloaking devices, advanced targeting systems, and maneuvering thrusters designed for hit-and-run tactics. Jessica Cole stood in the command center, staring out the viewport. The stars beyond were a cold, distant backdrop to the burning rage in her chest. The explosion that had nearly killed her, the lives lost in the blast, had only sharpened her resolve. The Empire had underestimated humanity before, and now they would see the price of that mistake. "We've confirmed the target, Ambassador," said Lieutenant Daniel Ward, a young officer with a fierce determination. "A convoy of Imperial supply ships. If we strike fast and hard, we can cripple their logistics in this sector." Jessica nodded, her voice calm despite the fury inside. "Then let's make it count. No mercy. We're here to send a message." Colonel Holt, standing beside her, didn't speak but gave a sharp, approving nod. His military mind was already running through the strategy. Holt's fleet of human ships was small, no match for the vast Imperial armada, but their strength lay in their unpredictability, their ability to adapt and outmaneuver. The convoy they were targeting was a minor operation in the grand scheme of the Empire, but it was a key strategic point. Taking it down would disrupt the Empire's supply chain for weeks and send a loud signal to the galaxy. "Stealth mode activated," Holt said, tapping his console. "We'll slip in and hit them before they even know we're here." The Vanguard's engines hummed softly as it vanished into the cloak of darkness. Ahead, a convoy of 6 Imperial freighters loomed, their bulky shapes sluggish and slow in comparison to the sleek human ships. The convoy was surrounded by a handful of Imperial fighter escorts, but they were no match for human ingenuity. "We'll take the freighters first," Holt said, pointing to the tactical display. "Disrupt their engines and communications. Once they're dead in the water, we deal with the escorts." Jessica leaned forward, watching the plan unfold. "Make it fast. We don't want to give them time to call for reinforcements." The fleet of human ships was ready, the crew steady and focused. Jessica could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. This would be their first true test of combat, and failure was not an option. The Vanguard fired first, its railguns screaming through the void with pinpoint accuracy. The first Imperial freighter exploded in a burst of light, its reactor core rupturing in a chain reaction. The second freighter followed moments later, its engines disabled by a precision EMP strike that left it dead in space. The remaining freighters scrambled, but it was too late. Human fighters darted in and out of the fray, their agility and speed making them nearly impossible targets for the lumbering Imperial escorts. But the Empire wasn't done. Their fighters retaliated, launching a flurry of laser fire. The human ships, built for quick strikes and rapid retreats, danced around the firestorm, taking hits but always striking back harder. The chaos of the battle unfolded with brutal precision, each human ship striking with deadly force, each move calculated to hit where it hurt the most. Jessica's heart raced as she watched the destruction unfold. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a declaration that humanity would no longer sit back and be silenced. The Empire had killed one of their own. Now, they would feel the cost. After minutes that felt like hours, the last of the Imperial fighters were destroyed, their wreckage floating in the cold vacuum of space. The convoy was crippled, the remaining freighters floating helplessly, their systems fried by EMP bursts. "Mission complete, Ambassador," Lieutenant Ward reported. "The convoy's gone. Their supplies won't make it to the front lines anytime soon." Jessica allowed herself a small breath of relief, but there was no time for celebration. "Good, but this is just the beginning. We've made a statement, but the Empire won't let this go. They'll retaliate." Holt stood beside her, his face a mask of determination. "We're ready for them. And we'll keep hitting them where it hurts. They'll learn soon enough. We fight because we have no choice." Jessica's gaze hardened. She could feel the weight of the future pressing down on her shoulders, but she knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer a side player in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. The war had begun, and the Empire had just made its first mistake. The Vanguard was a wounded ship, its sleek hull battered from the skirmish with the Imperial convoy. Yet it was still operational, and that was all that mattered. The human fleet had been forced to retreat after their initial strike, knowing the Empire would soon send reinforcements to wipe them out. The damage to the convoy, however, had sent a ripple across the galaxy, and word of the human raid spread like wildfire. But for Jessica Cole, the battle had only just begun. She had seen the faces of her fallen colleagues in her dreams, their blood staining the cold, metallic floors of Astra 9, and the only way to honor their sacrifice was to bring down the Empire. "Report," Jessica said, pacing the command deck. Colonel Holt, ever the pragmatist, was already deep in thought, his mind constantly working through contingencies. "We've hit them hard, Jessica, but the Empire won't just let us walk away. They're already marshalling reinforcements from the nearby sector. Within hours, we'll be facing twice the number of ships we just destroyed." Jessica nodded, her jaw set. The Empire's response was predictable, but she wasn't looking for a fight on their terms. "We can't wait for them to regroup. We need to act fast, before they can assemble their fleet." "And how do you suggest we do that?" Holt asked, his eyes narrowing in a way that suggested he already knew the answer but was bracing for it. "We go deeper," Jessica said. "We hit them where they least expect it, inside their own territory." A murmur rippled through the bridge. This wasn't just a reckless assault. This was a dangerous gamble. Jessica knew it, but she had no choice. The war wasn't just about defending humanity's right to exist. It was about striking at the heart of the Empire's arrogance and proving that they couldn't silence humanity with force alone. "You're talking about Zarnok," Holt said, his voice lowering. The name sent a shiver through the room. Zarnok was the capital world of the Empire, a planet heavily fortified with the most advanced military installations the Empire possessed. The idea of launching an assault on the heart of the Empire was as insane as it was audacious. "We've already uncovered some critical intelligence about the Empire's internal factionalism," Jessica said, her voice growing sharper with resolve. "There are high-ranking members of the Imperial government who are ready to betray Calderex, but they need proof. Zarnok is where they're hiding the evidence of the true mastermind behind the assassination of our diplomat. If we can get in, infiltrate their high-security data archives, and expose the conspiracy, it will shake the entire Empire to its core." Holt stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing the costs of such a mission. "Infiltrating Zarnok is suicide. We don't have the manpower, and we don't have the intel on their security measures. Even with the Vanguard's stealth capabilities, it's too risky." "I know," Jessica said quietly, "but it's the only option we have. We don't just need to fight them, Holt. We need to break them from the inside." There was a long pause, the tension palpable, but then Holt nodded, the stubborn resolve in his eyes matching hers. "All right, we'll do it your way. But I'm not sending a team into that hellhole without backup." Jessica didn't hesitate. "We'll need a small elite team, and the rest of the fleet can cause enough of a diversion to pull their forces off the planet's surface." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Holt organized the extraction teams, while Jessica worked with their covert intelligence officers to piece together a plan for infiltrating the most fortified city on Zarnok, one of the most dangerous and secure locations in the galaxy. The idea of sending a small human team into the heart of enemy territory seemed impossible, but Jessica knew this mission was their best hope for ending the war before it spiraled out of control. The stakes were higher now. Failure meant certain death for the infiltrators, and an even more brutal war for the rest of humanity. But Jessica Cole wasn't ready to lose, not yet. With or without the odds stacked against them, humanity would fight. And this time, they would take the fight directly to the Empire's doorstep. The Vanguard slid silently through the void, its stealth systems keeping it hidden from Imperial sensors. The team was ready, their mission clear: infiltrate Zarnak's capital city, retrieve the evidence of the Empire's betrayal, and escape without leaving a trace. Failure was not an option. Colonel Holt stood beside Jessica in the command center, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. He'd assembled a small, specialized team: soldiers, intelligence officers, and a few expert techs who could handle the infiltration. Jessica had chosen each of them carefully, knowing they were all hardened veterans, capable of navigating the chaos that would surely follow. ETA to Zarnak, Holt said, his voice low and steady. 20 minutes, Lieutenant Ward replied. We'll be in orbit soon, but it's a tight window. We'll have to move fast. Jessica's mind raced. She thought back to the intelligence they'd uncovered, the fragments of conspiracy that had surfaced in the wake of Ambassador Cole's assassination. The Imperial faction behind the murder had been careful, but not careful enough. There were key documents and communications hidden in the Empire's central database on Zarnak, proof that the assassination wasn't just a rogue action, but a calculated move by Supreme Commander Kaldrex and his closest allies. If they could expose that truth, it would unravel the Empire's grip on power. The war would change overnight. But Jessica knew the cost. Zarnak was a fortress. The Empire's forces were formidable, and even with their small, stealthy ship, they would face overwhelming odds. The operation had to be flawless, or it wouldn't leave the planet alive. Holt placed a hand on her shoulder. We're ready, Jessica. We'll do whatever it takes. But once we hit the surface, we're on our own. She nodded. We don't have a choice. We hit hard, grab the data, and get out. No detours. The team was already prepping for insertion, checking gear, calibrating weapons, and going over the plan. As the Vanguard slipped into the planet's atmosphere, a feeling of urgency settled over them. They were about to face the beating heart of the Empire, and it would be a miracle if they made it out. The drop was quick, too quick. The Vanguard's cloaking systems kept them undetected as they descended toward Zarnak's capital, but even the most advanced technology couldn't shield them from the sheer scale of the Empire's security. As they neared their target, Jessica's gut twisted. The city below was a maze of towering skyscrapers and sprawling complexes, guarded by layers of Imperial military forces. Every entrance, every access point was monitored by dozens of high-tech defense systems. We're not going to land, are we? Asked Lieutenant Caitlin Voss, the team's tech expert. She was scanning the city from her console, her eyes sharp and calculating. No, Holt replied. We'll deploy by ground drop, using the cover of night. The goal is to blend in, avoid detection. We get in, get out. No one sees us. Jessica clenched her fists. Stay low, stay quiet. The moment we're spotted, it's game over. As the team descended into the city, the oppressive weight of the Empire's presence was unmistakable. There were no peaceful streets, no signs of civilian life. Zarnak's capital was a military machine, its vast network of surveillance cameras and armed patrols ensuring that every citizen, every soldier, was under constant watch. The streets were cold, dark. An oppressive silence hung over everything, broken only by the occasional thrum of distant engines or the mechanical whir of sentry drones. Once on the ground, the team split up into pairs, moving quickly and silently through the shadowed streets, using back alleys and hidden access tunnels. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest as she moved through the urban labyrinth, the weight of the mission bearing down on her. Every corner could hide an Imperial soldier. Every shadow could conceal a threat. After what felt like hours, they reached the Imperial data vault, an imposing structure surrounded by layers of security. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. But Holt's team was prepared. Using encrypted signals and expert hacking, they bypassed the outer defenses and infiltrated the building. Inside, they made their way to the central archives, the heart of Zarnak's intelligence network. Jessica's pulse quickened as she realized they were just moments away from uncovering the truth that could end the war. But as she approached the main terminal, her comms crackled with an urgent warning. "They found us," Holt's voice said, calm but resolute. "Get the data, now." The sounds of distant alarms filled the air as Imperial forces began to close in on their location. There was no time to waste. "Move fast. This is our only shot," Jessica commanded. The firestorm was coming. But this time, humanity wasn't running. They were fighting back with everything they had. The data vault was a maze of steel and glass, its walls lined with rows of high-tech terminals and secure storage compartments. Jessica's breath came in shallow gasps as she moved swiftly between the rows, her mind focused entirely on the mission at hand. The evidence they needed was locked in the central terminal, a vault of Imperial secrets. But with every passing second, the risk of being caught increased. "We're on the clock, Jessica," Holt's voice came through her earpiece. "Security's already on alert. If we're not out in the next 5 minutes, we're done." "I know," Jessica muttered, her hands flying across the terminal's keypad. She could feel the pressure mounting. Every keystroke had to be perfect. They were already deep inside the Empire's most secure facility, and any mistake could trigger a response they wouldn't survive. Caitlin Voss, the team's tech specialist, stood watch by the door, her eyes scanning the hallway for movement. "Hurry up," she urged, her voice tense. "They'll be here any second." The screen in front of Jessica flickered, and then the files she was searching for appeared. Top-secret communications between Supreme Commander Calderex and his inner circle, detailing the conspiracy to assassinate the human diplomat and implicating high-ranking Imperial officials. "There it is," Jessica whispered, her heart pounding as she copied the files. "We've got what we need." But just as she was about to transfer the last piece of data, the door to the vault burst open with a deafening crash. "Get down," Holt shouted, pulling Jessica away from the terminal and into the shadows just as a squad of Imperial soldiers flooded into the room. The metallic clatter of their boots echoed through the chamber as they moved quickly, securing the perimeter. Caitlin dropped to the floor and activated the jammer, causing the lights to flicker as the entire vault system went into lockdown. The soldiers cursed as their equipment malfunctioned, their targeting systems offline. But they weren't helpless. They were trained, ruthless, and now they knew exactly where Jessica and her team were. "Go," Holt barked. "We got less than a minute before they fixed the system." The team sprinted down the narrow hallways, their footsteps a chaotic rhythm of fear and urgency. Jessica's mind raced. They had the data, but the escape was just beginning. The complex was a labyrinth of corridors, each more guarded than the last. They'd need to fight their way out, and they couldn't afford to waste any time. Explosions echoed from the distance, signaling that the Empire was going into full lockdown. A wave of soldiers rushed towards them, weapons raised. Holt fired first, the sharp report of his rifle cutting through the tense air. A guard went down, but there were too many coming. "We need an exit. Now," Jessica shouted. Caitlin quickly accessed a nearby control panel, hacking into the station's security network. "Got a maintenance lift. It'll get us to the surface level. Quickly." But just as the doors to the lift opened, a harsh voice echoed down the hallway. "Drop your weapons. Surrender now." Jessica froze. Behind them stood a tall, imposing figure, an Imperial officer, flanked by 2 armed soldiers. His uniform was impeccable, his face cold and unreadable. Supreme Commander Calderex's personal envoy, no doubt. "You're too late," the officer sneered. "The Empire doesn't tolerate insurgents, especially ones that think they can steal from us." Jessica's pulse surged. They'd been cornered, but they weren't out of options yet. In a split second, Holt made a decision. He turned and threw a smoke grenade at the advancing soldiers, filling the hall with dense, choking fog. "Go," Holt shouted, shoving Jessica into the lift. As the doors slammed shut, the team descended toward the surface, the sound of gunfire and shouting fading into the distance. But Jessica knew they weren't out of danger yet. The Empire would be relentless in their pursuit, and the battle was far from over. "Is the data secure?" Holt asked, his voice tense as they made their way through the maintenance shaft. Jessica nodded, clutching the data pad tightly to her chest. "We've got it. Now we just need to make it out alive." Outside, the skies of Zarnok were clear, the stars burning coldly in the distance. The Vanguard was waiting, but getting to it would take every ounce of strength they had left. The true fight had only just begun, and the real consequences of their actions were about to ripple across the galaxy. But one thing was certain: humanity would never back down. Not now. Not ever. The surface of Zarnok was a nightmare of flashing lights and sirens. Outside the maintenance shaft, the Imperial forces were swarming. Their presence felt everywhere. Soldiers patrolled the streets, their armored forms like silent, menacing shadows, while overhead, drones zipped through the skies, scanning for any sign of trouble. The city was in lockdown, a sprawling machine of military might designed to crush any resistance. Jessica's heart hammered in her chest as she moved through the shadows with her team, their every step heavy with urgency. They had the data they came for, but their escape was far from assured. The Vanguard was their only chance, but getting to it meant traversing miles of open terrain, all while dodging the Empire's relentless forces. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. "We need to split up," Holt said quietly, his voice tight with resolve. "It's the only way we'll make it out of here. The Empire's expecting us to go straight for the Vanguard, and they've already locked down the airspace." Jessica's eyes met his. "You're saying we split the team up and try to draw their attention away from the ship?" Holt nodded. "Exactly. Caitlin and I will lead a diversion to the north. You and the others head south. You're the one with the data. Jessica, you're the priority." Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but Holt's hard look silenced her. He was right. She had to trust him, and she had to trust the team. They had a plan, one that had no room for hesitation. "Understood," Jessica said, her voice cold but firm. She turned to the rest of the team. "We meet at the rendezvous point in 30 minutes. No matter what happens, we don't leave anyone behind." "Understood." The team nodded, and without another word, they split off into the night. Jessica and her small group moved quickly through the shadows, keeping low to the ground and staying out of sight as best as they could. The air was thick with tension, every corner hiding a potential ambush, every street a possible trap. But they were focused, determined. They had come too far to fail now. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the Vanguard came into view. Distant, but there, waiting like a lifeline. They just had to make it there. 5 minutes, Jessica muttered to herself, glancing at her watch. "We're almost there." Suddenly, the crackle of a comm device interrupted the silence. It was Caitlin's voice, distorted by static, but clear enough to understand. "We're in trouble. The diversion's working, but they're sending reinforcements, and they're heading your way. Move fast." Jessica's stomach dropped. Reinforcements. The Empire was putting everything they had into stopping them, but there was no turning back now. "We're on our way," Jessica responded, already signaling for her team to move faster. But before they could take another step, a loud roar of engines broke through the air. Jessica froze, her blood running cold. The unmistakable sound of Imperial attack ships descending from the sky. "Get down," she shouted. They dove into an alley just as a barrage of laser fire erupted around them. The heat from the blasts singed the edges of the buildings, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Empire had found them. "Move. Keep moving." Holt's voice came over the comms, urgent. "We need to buy you more time." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. As they sprinted toward the ship, the Vanguard's engines roared to life, its stealth systems blinking online in preparation for launch. But it wouldn't be enough to just get in and go. If they wanted to survive, they'd have to fight their way to the ship. As Jessica rounded a corner, an explosion rocked the street in front of her, sending debris flying. She ducked, narrowly avoiding a piece of shrapnel that tore through the air. The team kept moving, guns drawn, firing back at the advancing Imperial forces that were closing in on their position. "We've got one shot," Holt said, gritting his teeth as he fired his weapon. "We make it to the ship, or we die trying." Jessica didn't hesitate. They had come this far, and no matter the cost, they couldn't let the Empire win. Not now. The Vanguard was in sight, only a few hundred meters away, but every step felt like an eternity. The sky above them was ablaze with the trails of missiles, lasers, and the streaking lights of Imperial fighters. It was a battle they couldn't win, but they didn't need to win. They just needed to survive long enough to reach the ship. And then, a miracle. From the direction they'd come, the sound of an explosion echoed, a massive blast that rattled the ground beneath their feet. The diversion had worked. The Empire's reinforcements had been delayed just long enough. "Move," Holt shouted. "Now or never." Jessica led the way, her breath shallow, her mind clear. This was it. They were going to make it. She could see the Vanguard ahead, its ramp descending, the crew waiting for them. With a final burst of speed, they reached the ship just as the first wave of Imperial soldiers arrived, too late to stop them. The ramp sealed behind them with a heavy thud. And as the ship shot into the air, Jessica allowed herself a single, exhausted breath. But as they broke free from Zarnok's atmosphere and entered the cold expanse of space, Jessica knew the cost of Defiance was only beginning. The Empire would not stop. Not now. Not ever. But neither would humanity. And the war was far from over. The stars stretched out before them, cold and distant, as the Vanguard punched through Zarnok's atmosphere, leaving the shattered capital behind. The ship's engines hummed low, almost drowned by the tension hanging in the air. Jessica Cole stood at the command center, staring out at the darkness of space, her fingers tight around the console. The mission was a success, but it felt like a fleeting moment of relief, a temporary lull before the storm. "Coordinates set for the rendezvous point," Lieutenant Ward said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "We're heading back to the fleet. Should be out of Imperial range in about 30 minutes. Jessica nodded, not looking at him. "Good. We need to get that data into the right hands. Fast." The team had made it out alive. But it wasn't just a victory. It was a declaration. The evidence they had retrieved from Zarnok's data vault was damning. Proof that Supreme Commander Kaldrex had orchestrated the assassination of Ambassador Alex Cole, a plot that went all the way to the highest ranks of the Empire's inner circle. The truth had been exposed, but with it came consequences. The Empire was already moving to crush the insurgency, and the reprisals would be brutal. "We'll need to prepare for the fallout," Colonel Holt said, his voice low but filled with resolve as he approached Jessica. "The Empire won't take this lying down. They'll come after us with everything they have." Jessica's gaze hardened. Let them come. Her words weren't a challenge, but a statement of inevitability. Humanity had been pushed into a corner, and now they had nothing left to lose. The war was no longer just a matter of survival. It was a fight for their place in the galaxy. The Empire had killed her father, tried to silence them, and underestimated the resilience of the human spirit. Now, it would pay for that arrogance. "We need to spread the word," Holt continued, his voice softer now, his eyes reflecting the same grim determination. "The galaxy needs to know what the Empire has done. We've got the proof, but we need the message to go public." Jessica turned to face him, her expression a mask of focus. "I know. The Vanguard's communications array will be able to broadcast to the other sectors. We get the truth out. We force the hand of the Empire. They can't keep hiding behind lies." "Agreed," Holt said. "But it's going to take more than just a broadcast. We'll need allies. We'll need to hit the Empire where it hurts most. Take out their propaganda. stir up rebellion across the galaxy. Jessica knew the stakes. The Empire had its grip on countless worlds, and tearing that down would take time, effort, and most of all, courage. But for the first time since the assassination, Jessica felt something stirring deep within her, a flicker of hope. Humanity wasn't just a pawn in this war. They were becoming the storm. "We'll fight, Holt," she said, her voice calm but laced with iron resolve. "And we'll make sure they know who we are, who I am." The vanguard raced toward the rendezvous point, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Her father's death would not be in vain. The blood of the fallen would be honored. The Empire had sown the seeds of its own destruction, and the rebellion was already taking root. The stars outside the viewport glimmered, silent witnesses to the fires that were about to rage across the galaxy. In the deep silence of space, the war had only just begun, but humanity had found its voice, and now it would not be silenced.